This podcast is sponsored by Teens and Youth in Leadership, TYIL Africa, an organization that is committed to raising generations of young leaders across Africa. Our programs include leadership education, leadership fellowship, research training, webinars, and conferences. Stay informed of our programs by following us on LinkedIn at TYIL and at TYIL Africa on Instagram.
Hello, you're welcome to the Future of Leadership podcast, where we discuss about issues related to leadership and, in fact, youth leadership. My name is Israel Oyedare, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm also the founder of Teens and Youth in Leadership, popularly known as TYIL, an organization focused on youth leadership development. Through this podcast, you will learn from seasoned professionals and leadership scholars on their thoughts and perspectives on youth leadership. Stay tuned. Today, I'm here with one person I really cherish in the academia, a fellow of the Associate for Psychological Science, APS, and a professor of industrial and organizational psychology at Virginia Tech, Dr. Foti. Thank you so much for accepting to speak with me on this podcast.
Happy to do it. I'm looking forward to it.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing way better than yesterday.
That's very interesting to know. All right, so I've been following you for over 2 years now, and I'm really impressed with your work. I'm very interested in knowing what has inspired you to pursue this field of leadership studies.
So how did I get started? It's an interesting story. So I was a senior undergraduate, and my university required that we had to do a senior capstone seminar. And somehow I heard about industrial organizational psychology. It was really new, and I decided it was really cool, and I wanted to learn more. So I convinced the 10 other students in my senior seminar that they also wanted to learn about industrial and organizational psychology. And the instructor, who was my undergraduate advisor, so everyone said, okay, let's do this. And the instructor, who was an experimental psychologist and didn't know anything about industrial and organizational psychology, brought in guest speakers all semester long from both academics and industry. And even though it was a relatively new area of psychology, it was kind of based in, I would say, applying behaviorism to studying organizational problems. And by the end of the semester, I was hooked. I wanted to be an industrial organizational psychologist, but now it's my senior year of undergrad. It's too late to apply for graduate school. So I went to work, and then 2 years later started my PhD program at the University of Akron.
Oh, that's
the story.
That's very interesting. So you've been looking at industrial and organizational psychology. Now, I know a portion of your work, or a huge portion of your work, is in followership leadership studies. In fact, I referenced one of your work with TYIL on implicit followership theory last year, and I was really impressed with the way it was, the theory was analyzed. But why leadership?
That's pretty fortuitous. And so when I went to graduate school, I decided I would take an assistantship, not in the psychology department, but as a head resident in charge of a dormitory of students, because it paid better and gave me free room and board. And I was thinking, that's less student loans, so it was a better financial deal. And so because I didn't have an assistantship in the psychology department, I decided I was going to interview all the faculty in the IO area, right, in the industrial organizational psychology area. And then I interviewed Robert Lord, and I was so excited about his area of research on leadership and perceptions of leadership. And from my work experience the previous 2 years, I could see how some of these ideas played out in the work setting and in the group setting. And so we started working together my very first semester. As a PhD student, we wrote a book chapter together. So it was really, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but his work sounded the most exciting to me of any of the faculty that in that graduate training area. And so I gravitated to leadership. And I think part of it was I stuck with it because of him. He was such a great mentor, so open to joint ideas that we could build a research program together. He was a young assistant professor when I was a new PhD student. And the idea of being able to contribute almost equally to the research was really exciting to me.
Wow. I really must mention that I was looking through your Google Scholar articles and I saw Robert Lord, and I was like, what's this person? Is he also a tech? And thank you so much for giving context and sharing how you got to meet him. So this second question I want to ask is about your youth or teenage years. Do you think it had any influence on some of the leadership perception you currently have or have had in your professional or academic journey?
I'm going to answer that a couple different ways. One of the kind of cool lines of research that I've done is on different age groups' perceptions of leaders. And so I team up with developmental psychologists, and we start with like 4-year-olds, and then kindergartners, and then end of elementary school, and then middle school, high school, university students, adults. And so the adults, I get through my leadership development workshops, the university students from my classes and my colleagues' classes, and then the students, the school students, through connections a developmental psychologists have with different school systems. So basically, we ask them to draw a leader. The elementary school kids, we're still asking them the same question to draw a leader. And when we get to 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, kindergartners, first graders, second graders, they draw and describe women as leaders. And then by the time we get to the end of elementary school, we're drawing sports figures, mostly men, or historical figures, mostly men. And then that stays all the way through to adulthood. And even when I will do this activity in my classes, while their instructor is female, who studies leadership, and they're still drawing none. So I think part of my fascination with how people perceive leadership is what happens, right? I mean, it's probably younger youth than you're targeting. What happens in that 5th, 6th grade time frame that shifts perceptions away from women as leaders to more men as leaders? And I think that's really important. But the other piece, if I reflect on my own youth and what was important to me and how it links to my leadership, not so much in a research perspective, but a more personal or relationship perspective, and it was all about values. Okay, and so my high school years was really a reflection on my core values. And I think that's incredibly important for youth to do because it's going to form the basis of their leadership style. And so understanding how your values shape who you are as a person, your identity, how you communicate with people, and that all is part of leadership. And so for me, I don't know that I think about, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in answer to some of your other questions. I don't know that I think about it yet as leadership, especially in middle school, but I think more about understanding who you are as a person first. I really believe that self-reflection is key, right, to leadership. And then part of that self-reflection has to be understanding what values are most important to you. I don't know whether authentic leadership is something that I believe in, I'm going to be honest, but I do think people can tell when you're being true to yourself and when you're not. And in order to be true to yourself, you really have to understand what's most important to you. And I think for youth, that's where I would focus, not so much on leadership positions. I think that's the third question.
Yeah.
How would you define leadership in the context of youth? I would love youth to think about leadership not as formal position. They can, or not only as a formal position. Yeah, okay, I'm the captain of the sports team. I'm the captain of student council, or I'm the president of student council. That's great, but that's not the only place you can lead. And I think this is part of my research, right, which was the emergence of leadership.
Yeah.
I would encourage youth to think about leading in place. You don't have to hold a position of leadership to be a leader. You can exert influence in every position you hold, whether it's designated as a leadership position or not. And so the idea of informal leadership is really appealing to me, as well as formal leadership. If we only think about what at least US students write in their university admissions essays, right? I was and they list all the formal leadership. Great. Okay, but there's not enough of those to go around. You can still build your leadership skills by being in a team.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's that informal process. So I would love to be able to focus on, and I am with the provost office here, working with faculty on a leadership development program called Leading in Place. So again, more informal opportunities for leadership in addition to the formal ones.
Yeah, so just to piggyback on what you said about self-leadership. So I currently run a non-profit organization called Teens and Youth in Leadership in Africa, where we teach leadership to African post-secondary and secondary school students. One of the activities that we do is self-reflection. So at the end of our programs, we ask them to close their eyes and just imagine their previous leadership journeys. What were the things they had done in the past? What are the things they think they could do better? And what would they start doing? So they do it for about 15 to 20 minutes. And it's something that we deliberately incorporate, because we notice that many young leaders, they learn leadership, they go to school, they take on positional leadership, but then many of them don't pause to ask themselves questions that has to do with, what have I done on this role? So when you mentioned self-reflection, just alluded to the fact that I'm doing the right thing. And again, it's something that is very absent in many leadership development programs. People don't teach about self-reflection.
And when I do leadership talks here at the undergraduate level, I always bring this value exercise with me, where you bundle values together, and at the end of like a reduction process, you come up with your three main values, and then you have to go find somebody who knows you well, and you have to talk about how you demonstrate those values. And then for me to think about leadership, in what kinds of situations would it be the most challenging for you to demonstrate, like to live those values? So we all talk about what happens in leadership crisis situations, and whether leaders rise to the occasion or they don't. And it's just a good way for youth to start thinking about, how do I demonstrate those values, and when will it be most challenging for me to demonstrate those values? Again, it's all part of that self-reflection process.
Thank you. So now, going to the values, or sticking with the values, I'm going to ask this question that has to do with global leadership or globalization. The world has changed. Things are evolving. Technology is advancing. Introduction of AI. Now, how do you think we can have value-based leadership in the realms of all of these advancements?
Okay. There's so many different ways I could answer that. So let me give a concrete example. So I'm working with a group of faculty, computer science faculty and psychology faculty, to do an AI generated leadership coaching model. So in real time, right? And so you have a situation and you want to practice what you're going to communicate to a teammate or a subordinate. And so you type it into this chat box, right? And then AI generates like, here's my situation, here's what I want to say. And you get feedback immediate from the AI coach about, well, perhaps a better way to communicate this would be this. And then you can try again and you can get more feedback. And so the computer scientists are really good at creating the interface, right? But we have to feed the right knowledge base into the AI. That's the psychology part of it. That's my job on the team, is what does the science say about leadership, and making sure that we're not scraping the whole web for for what has no knowledge base, right? And so I think the challenge is AI is only as good as what is there, right? I mean, years and years ago, when computers first started, garbage in, garbage out. And it's not all garbage, but it's not all useful either. And so I think the challenge is this: how do you, the plural you, how do we get AI to recognize where we want to be, not just where we currently are, right? And so if we want to change those values, for example, then AI is not in the position to do that. I mean, I know you can argue with AI. I've seen people do it, and it's super interesting, but and AI will admit, I've seen it, like GPT-4, I'm wrong, right? Okay, yep, I didn't know that. I'm like, okay, then learn it, right? But it's an interesting question. It's a good question, because what if I don't want to do what the AI says I should do? And I think that's your question, right? What if the information that I'm getting runs counter to my values, right? And to me, that's where opening up the whole World Wide Web to scrape might not be the bet. I mean, that's not what we're doing in our project. Okay, we're basing it in the education and psychology research literatures on leadership and the communication literature, which also studies leadership. So what we're doing is pulling in the knowledge base that isn't everything you can possibly find about how to talk to your employees, for example, or how to talk to your teammates. That just puts, for me, more emphasis on understanding yourself. The technology might make it even more challenging, right? To be true to yourself.
So now, do you think that youth of this age, youth who are fortunate to be present in this world right now, have more opportunities to lead?
I think they have a couple things. They're the largest demographic, right? They have the technology skills that current leaders don't have. Right. But I also think they have more examples of youth leaders than we did 10 years ago. I said, so for me, I mean, if I think about the environmentalist, Greta Thunberg, and I think about the David Hogue, the Parkland school shooting survivor that started a political action group and has raised millions of dollars to support candidates that will support gun control. So I think that there are youth leader examples out there, people who show that their leadership is reflection of their values. And so I think we have way more role models for youth than we did before. And I think we need to do two things. Well, we need to do a lot of things, but I think linking examples and mentoring with the formal and informal ways you can exhibit leadership, and then realizing, right, the leaders who of now need to realize that there's going to be a huge gap in leadership if we don't do something about it now. And we're not very good. We're horrible in academics about succession planning.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And organizations aren't that much better. And so if you combine how bad we are at developing leaders, right, with the idea that all of this old leaders are going to be off, right, are going to be dead. And then we're going to have all of these youth that need to be leaders. And we're going to have to do some kind of development.
Yeah.
And then the piece of that, like, well, how do you develop them, right? Leadership is a relationship.
Yeah.
And so to say you have leadership traits and you don't, I think that's completely wrong way to approach it. Yes, personalities can play into that, but so are skills and competencies. And those skills are the things that you can develop in people. And getting people to understand their values and self-reflection is all part of that process. Now, what kind of leadership behaviors are easy for you, and which ones are more difficult? Which ones do you kind of revert to when things are easy versus when things are hard? So all of that self-reflection and self-knowledge has to be in there, but more from a skill or competency perspective, and not so much from a trait perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting, because I was going to ask that, how can adult leaders prepare young folks in the field of leadership? And you've just mentioned that, we haven't done enough work and more work needs to be done.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, just if you look at the research literature on youth leadership, it's non-existent.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an interesting piece a couple of years ago in American Psychologist. It was on the APA website, but it's like all the research. I mean, Susan Comavez, right, has done some work there, but it's all, I mean, maybe we go to university students, but we don't go younger than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where I think industrial and organizational psychologists need to team up, right? We need to team up with developmental people, because if you think about youth, right, that age group, there's a rapid development of personality, of peer relationships, of identity. It would make so much sense to put leadership there, as opposed to wait until I'm in a career and now I'm going to start talking about leadership. Then we can change the perceptions, right? If we wait to ask people, well, what's your image of a leader like when they're an adult? We're just perpetuating the status quo. If we push it down and start talking about leadership with youth, I think we have a better chance to change people's perceptions of leaders, because they're not that focused yet, right? They started out as more female, right? And then went more male, but it's not set in stone yet. And that's what excites me about doing youth leadership development work.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing. So I'm going to ask this final question, and it's off script. Now,
okay.
When you look at 50 years from now, or maybe 70 years from now, what do you think leadership would be about? Now, there has been lots of schools of thought. Some people have said it's going to be collaborative leadership, eco-leadership. It's going to be structureless leadership. Some people have said, it's going to be about, social leadership. But what do you think? Or what do you desire to see? Yeah.
I would like to see us move away from leadership residing in a person and understand the influence process, right? So for me, leadership is the process of exerting influence over others to accomplish a goal. Okay. And then what do? We study individuals. Okay. Oh, you're charismatic. That's why we don't have any understanding of the influence process or the relationship. And so then to me, that's I think to truly make a contribution to leadership, we have to understand how it unfolds. We just can't give somebody an assessment and say, you're a leader and you're not a leader, or you'll make a better leader, so I'm going to put you into a training program. But the training program just talks about what the leader does, right? The leader competencies, the leader skills. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying it's incomplete because it's not talking about context. It's not talking about the other people in the equation, right? That you have to influence. You can't ignore them. And so your communication skills are important. Your listening skills are important. The trust that you develop in that work group is important. That's what I mean about the process. So I would like to see us move away from focusing on a formal leader to understanding the process of influence in whatever situation, sports team, right? Academic work group, industry, project team. I think the leadership influence process transcends to some extent all those situations, and that it may be less complex, right? In the youth leadership, and then gets more complex, right? And as you move into an organization and a vocation and in a job. So
you sharing that just gave me this moment of epiphany that leadership is about the leader, the follower, but there's a space in between, and that is what needs to be studied.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Space in between.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with me. Do you have any closing sentence you want to share to maybe anybody in Africa who is listening to you and would like to develop themselves in the area of leadership? Because Africa has a long way to go in terms of leadership development. And sad to note, there is no leadership curriculum. There is no curriculum that covers leadership in most of the African countries' university or even basic school. And that's sad.
But I do think you're taking the initiative there, right?
Yes.
And that's what's really exciting. And so we are still we have in the US kind of one-off programs, but there's no unified way to teach or develop leaders. Everyone has their own special little way. But I see that you're trying to change that. And I think that's really exciting.
Thank you so much.
Definitely necessary.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. It's really a pleasure speaking with you and to have this interview with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Leadership podcast today. If you are here to kindly share, subscribe, leave a review, and follow us across our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, all at TYIL. See you in the next episode.